How's it going, everybody? So I wanted to give my opinion on the Frank Tufano versus Vegan Gains debate. I suppose there's a couple reasons why I want to give my opinion on this, because I usually don't talk about or criticize other people's videos and things of that nature, but I suppose it's something that I'm definitely going to do in this video, but I'm going to be starting to do from this point on. So anyway, there's a lot of very important points to be made from that Frank Tufano versus Vegan Gains debate. So first of all, most of the people that are like commenting on Frank Tufano's thing, saying like, oh, you know, Vegan Gains manipulative and blah blah blah, most of those people it sounds like they didn't really watch the debate. I doubt they did, and if they did, they just seem to lack comprehension skills. Because it was very, very clear what was really going on if anybody watched that debate. So, you know, Frank Tufano and some of the other YouTubers that do the carnivore diet kind of got me to start to eat mainly meat for a couple weeks, really, just because I also experienced digestive issues, just like a lot of these people. And I just wanted to see, like, if I experience any significant health benefits from eating mainly meat and animal products. So when I watched this debate, it made me realize that Vegan Gains, it made me realize that Frank Tufano didn't really seem to be as sensible as I had previously thought. So and I was an ex-vegan for a very long time. So I'm coming at this whole thing from a very kind of on the fences, been there and done that with both approaches type of thing. Anyway, from the beginning, Frank Tufano definitely seemed to be confused. Within the first 2 minutes, he couldn't even explain his own diet in a coherent fashion. He was having a lot of trouble articulating himself, and I noticed that in his interview with Primal Edge Health as well. He didn't really seem to be able to communicate effectively with Tristan, and definitely showed here in this debate. It's kind of interesting because I don't like to watch Vegan Gains debates, because usually he just starts to cuss at people and argue with people and talk over them, and you don't really get any productive information or benefit or value from it. But in this debate, Frank Tufano seemed to have low testosterone, because he was freaking out, like getting offended and emotionally invested, and you can tell he was getting really stressed out. And to me, I find this really silly, because you're supposed to just be discussing your nutritional beliefs, and Vegan Gains was very, very calm throughout the entire thing. The big issue here is that Frank Tufano, okay, so Vegan Gains asked about his diet. Frank Tufano couldn't really explain his diet very, very effectively. And then basically Vegan Gains asked, well, why do you follow that diet, or whatever, or Frank Tufano had said something about believing that the diet is superior to veganism because of fat-soluble vitamins or something like that. And then Vegan Gains said, all right, well, how about we start there? And Frank Tufano started going on and on about primitive cultures and how primitive tribes and societies that are untouched by modern man are his idea of health, that they're free of degenerative disease and this and that. Then Vegan Gains had to ask the most obvious next question. Well, what is your idea of, well, first of all, what is your proof that these people do not have disease? And Frank Tufano said, well, if you want me to reference Weston Price, blah, blah, blah. It's like, he can't just answer the questions. The whole time, every time he was asked a question, Frank would just kind of like stumble over his own words and never actually answer the question. It was very cringy, very, very cringy. It's like, whoa, what is wrong with this guy's brain? He can't think straight. So he's going on and on about primitive cultures are healthy, blah, blah, blah. Weston Price found it, blah, blah, blah. And Vegan Gains asked him, what does he mean by, or where's your evidence that they're healthy? And he was like, oh, Weston Price, they have great, beautiful faces, facial structure, teeth, etc. And then Vegan Gains said, well, that's not really a great metric for health. Somebody can have great facial structure and teeth, but then have heart disease or cancer on the inside. And Frank just started to like spew out some incoherent nonsense again. And by the way, I was a really big fan of Frank's channel. Really was, because I thought that he had a lot of great information, but now I realize he's kind of just regurgitating information from books and elsewhere. He doesn't seem to actually understand what he's talking about. And he tries really hard to make it sound like he does, but he really doesn't, because he can't discuss the information back and forth with other people. So that's a key indicator that they don't know what they're talking about. And so, you know, the entire first hour was just Vegan Gains trying to get Frank to present some sort of real evidence that primitive cultures are healthy. And Frank could not do it. And that's not good, because your whole channel is about a primitive human diet, right? Like the raw meat diet. The reason why he believes that the raw meat diet is good is because he believes that primitive cultures are healthy, and it's what primitive cultures eat, according to him. Problem with that is he has no evidence that these people are healthy. And Vegan Gains then presented some studies and information, some evidence, like at least some evidence, right? The only evidence of the health of primitive cultures was actually presented by Vegan Gains. He had said, okay, well, check out the Horus study. And Frank the whole time was fixating on the Egyptians in that study, even though there's actually 3 hunter-gatherer societies that were clearly primitive, and they were actually accounted for in that study. And Frank couldn't get over, oh, Egyptians, your idea of evidence is mummies and blah, blah, blah. The point is that Frank believes primitive cultures were healthy, but he has no evidence to prove that they're healthy. He has a book from a dentist named Weston Price that says that primitive cultures were healthy and they had great teeth and blah, 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 and whatnot. But Weston Price never ran a coronary artery plaquing test, ultrasound, right, of their coronary arteries. Weston Price never tested their lipids, never ran blood tests on them. They didn't even have most of these heart disease panels and whatnot back in those days. So how the fuck are you going to say, oh, Weston Price says they're healthy, so I believe they're healthy? Like, that's not evidence. That was the only thing that Frank could pull out of his ass the entire time. And again, like, I really enjoyed his channel, but watching this was really hard. It was like, whoa, this guy has no clue what the fuck he's talking about. And Vegan Gains presented the Horus study, which is not perfect, not amazing, but it's evidence that they had heart disease nonetheless. Does that mean that they had a high prevalence of heart disease just because of the mummies? Well, you know, mummified remains can calcify over time, from what I understand, and the type of x-rays that they use to determine the health of the arteries in these mummies, it's not really the most reliable, but it is evidence nonetheless, and Frank presented no evidence. So 30 minutes went by, and Frank could not understand why Vegan Gains brought up the Horus study. Frank had no idea, like, how to steer the debate in a favorable direction for him. Like, he didn't even seem to try to debate the study in a tangible way. He was just like, sound like a butthurt little kid, like man, like, yeah, like mummies, like, nah, like, he didn't make any sense. So then he started Googling a bunch of nonsense in the middle of the video, and he was talking about like marbling of the arteries and this and that, which really it's really nonsense. It makes no sense. It sounds like something that he read in like some health vlogger article or something. It's not a real thing. Frank said that that arterial sclerosis is not a degenerative disease, and that made no fucking sense. Frank was trying to say that like the heart disease that hunter-gatherers experience was not the same heart disease that we experience. He was trying to say that they had plaquing of their arteries, but it was not pathogenic. It was not a disease thing. And, you know, that is absolute nonsense. It's either you have heart disease or you don't. And then Vegan Games was asking, like, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean? How do you have plaquing of the artery but then not call it heart disease? And then Frank's like, well, you know, like, it's hard to explain it. Marbling of the artery, blah, blah, blah. Let me look it up. Let me Google search it to try to find that health vlogger article that I found, and blah, blah, blah. So Frank was just like Google searching nonsense and just not making any sense. So then if you fast forward to like, I think it was like 40 minutes in, Frank pulls up a study to prove that the Maasai were healthy, or to prove that the Maasai had like some kind of magical heart disease that doesn't actually kill you. And in that, he actually showed that the Maasai tribe had high prevalence of heart disease. The article that Frank pulled up said the Maasai very commonly have plaquing of the arteries. It's very common in their society. And Frank was trying to say, at first Frank was trying to say like, oh, it's yes, they have plaquing of the artery, but it's a different type of plaquing that doesn't cause disease, even though plaquing of the artery is heart disease by definition. And the entire point of all of this was just to prove whether primitive cultures suffered from disease or they didn't, because health is the absence of disease. So if hunter-gatherer tribes suffered from heart disease in any form, they're not healthy by definition. And Frank tried to say, well, heart disease is not a degenerative disease. It's not obesity and modern and blah, blah, blah. And then he tried to say, it's a different marbling of the artery, kind of like a marbling on the steak. You know, you want the perfect marbling, blah, blah, blah. Like, bitch, we're talking about arteries. We're not talking about juicy steaks. Even though you know he loves those steaks. Then he tried to say that it wasn't pathogenic, and then he pulled up some study like that he Google searched in the middle of the debate, and was trying to say that you know, they had heart disease but they were immune to it. Okay, and the thing is, we are not immune to heart disease. Okay, we actually die from heart attacks. The Maasai, apparently their arteries open up as they age. More research should be done into that. That would be excellent to really figure out what exactly causes the opening of the artery. But one thing is very clear here. That article said that they have plaques in their arteries, and those plaques in their arteries are United States' #1 killer. That is what we die from the most here in America. We actually die from that shit. So trying to say, oh, well, the Maasai are immune to the plaquing of the artery, so it's like some kind of mutant heart disease, you know? So if you eat like the Maasai, then, you know, your arteries are going to have the same genetic adaptation as the Maasai, but you're going to have plaquing of the artery, but you're just going to be immune to it. Like, and maybe that will happen, right? But probably not. Okay, the whole entire point is that primitive cultures and all cultures and throughout history have most likely suffered from heart disease. And all of the evidence in the entire debate pointed towards that. And Frank just couldn't get it through his head. He couldn't understand what Vegan Gains is trying to say. And it's really crazy that he couldn't understand. It was very, very, very simple. Frank clearly has never researched primitive cultures before. He's never researched the health of primitive cultures. Yes, he's read Weston Price's Disease and Physical Degeneration, or what have you. He's read Weston Price's book. He says he's read some Paul Chek books, right? So he's read some books that say primitive cultures are healthy. That's not research on the health of primitive cultures. If Frank would have ever actually researched this shit to actually see if these primitive cultures were healthy or not, to see if his diet that he's eating that's modeled after primitive cultures is actually healthy, if he did research into this, he would have found the Horus study. But what does Frank do after the interview? He blames Vegan Gains, saying that he's manipulating him. He manipulated him and changed the subject on him and blah, blah, blah. Frank, you chose to talk about the health of primitive cultures from the beginning of the debate. Vegan Gains did not choose that, okay? In the messages that Frank said in his aftermath video, the messages that they were sending on Twitter said that they wanted to discuss the health effects of a carnivore diet. Well, Frank brought up, I believe that the carnivore diet is healthy because primitive cultures are healthy and that's what they ate. And so then Vegan Gains had to ask him, what makes you think that they're healthy? Did they have heart disease? And that's the reason why they were hung on that subject for so long. Frank never tried to steer the debate in the direction of, meat is healthy because of this, or, plaquing the artery because of this and that. Nothing he said made fucking sense the entire time. He actually brought up the topic of the debate from the beginning, and then after the debate, Frank has the excuse, the reason why I suck so bad at the debate is because Vegan Gains changed the subjects on me. That's not true. You chose all of the subjects. You brought this stuff up. The problem here is not manipulation. Anyone who says that lacks brain power, and it's really sad. The problem here is you promote a diet that you never researched before outside of books, and then fat-soluble vitamins. And that's the other thing you kept bringing up. Fat-soluble vitamins. Fat-soluble vitamins. I eat what I eat because of fat-soluble vitamins. The problem with this is he's never researched the prevalence of deficiencies within vegans. And I never did either, because I have a history of saying vegans were deficient, but now I actually understand some of the, how to interpret a lot of these meta-analysis and other things, and it makes a little bit more sense to me. I admit I was wrong with a lot of things myself. Of course, I don't agree with everything that was said on Vegan Gains' part in this debate or other things. I'm just giving my opinion on this entire shabam. It was very, very clear that Frank never researched any of the crap he was saying. And he's the one who's promoting this whole, eat raw animal flesh because vegans can't get the same nutrients in their plants. Vegans are eating an unnatural diet, blah, blah, blah. Primitive cultures are healthy. He had no evidence that primitive cultures were healthy. The evidence he did bring up showed they have heart disease. He had no evidence that you can't get fat-soluble vitamins from plants, which, by the way, I personally think it's a good idea to eat at least fish and eggs to supplement from time to time in a moderate level. I don't think that would really hurt anybody, but of course Vegan Gains would disagree with me, and that's fine. So the big issue here and the main point I want to make is that Frank had no clue what he was talking about, and everything he talks about in his YouTube channel is stuff he's probably read on a Google article. He doesn't actually research the significance of the information. Doesn't research meta-analysis, cohort studies. He probably reads articles about the mechanism of action behind these fat soluble vitamins, but he doesn't actually look at research about vitamin K2, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E even, which isn't something he talks about very regularly, which he should. I think that animal fats are very important for metabolism of these vitamins, but I don't think that you should be eating a carnivore diet or a very high intake of saturated fat. I think that saturated fat should be minimal to moderate, depending on what you're doing exactly. Also, weight loss also has a significant impact on how harmful these things are. So there's a lot of different factors to discuss. And Frank kept wanting to change the subject whenever he was backed up into a corner, realizing that he wasn't making jack shit sense. So I actually have a script here, and I actually recorded an entire video like 2 days ago using this script, but then my computer randomly turned off on me, so I kind of lost that video, and that really sucks, but I think this video is probably going to be much better. So Frank did not have any evidence that these cultures were healthy, but his entire YouTube channel is based on the premise that these primitive cultures were healthy. He really needs to take a year off from YouTube and actually research the shit. He had before he even took the debate, he already set up excuses for himself, saying that he was saying that he doesn't have time to research, and he really wishes that he had time, and he doesn't really care, and this and that. Look, man, if you don't have time to research, why are you making videos advising people on a healthy diet and criticizing other people for their supposedly unhealthy habits? You have no idea what health even is. You think that plaquing of the artery is healthy. That's literally what you said. Oh no, it's cool. The plaquing of the arteries, you can have plaque in the artery and still be healthy. That's not a good person to follow, okay? Really. How the fuck can people, believe what he says? So yeah, the Horus study included Egyptians, but there were three other societies that they also studied. The Egyptians were actually documented to have eaten fish, grains, fruits, and vegetables, a pescatarian-style diet. But they also lived off of fish from the Nile River, and they probably drank from the Nile River, which is probably infested with parasites, bacteria, and other contaminants, which could possibly be to blame for a buildup of plaques. Also, the fact that they were mummified remains, which can cause plaquing of the artery, and the scan could also have been faulty. Also, I believe they drank tons of alcohol due to the need for clean hydration. And just in general, they drank a lot of alcohol, and we know that alcohol actually is a significant risk factor for heart disease. It increases the stress of the heart, and increases your risk for heart disease and stroke especially. And also, I'm not sure, but I think that they might have had access to sugar at that time. But again, it was stated that they primarily a pescatarian diet. So we don't really know what these people are eating, but we don't need to know what these people are eating. And that was something Frank was saying too. Oh, well, we don't know what these people are eating, so this study is bullshit. But look, the whole entire point of Vegan Gains presenting that study was to provide some kind of context for the diet that you think is so healthy. You should thank him for actually giving you insight into these primitive cultures, because clearly you've never researched the health of primitive cultures before. You said, I believe that primitive cultures are healthy. Vegan Gains said, where's your evidence? You had no evidence. So Vegan Gains brought up some evidence that actually runs counter to what you were thinking. Frank never heard of these studies on primitive cultures, so it's very obvious that Frank never looked it up. And if Frank never looked up the health of primitive cultures, why are people actually following his advice? The real issue here is that Frank is an advocate for the carnivore diet philosophy, and he's preaching to people the benefits of eating like primitive cultures, and he hasn't actually verified that these cultures are even healthy in the first place. Okay, Western Price and this and that, and fat soluble vitamins, and oh, it's natural, bro. you know, in nature, blah, blah, blah. Look, these people, a lot of these cultures sacrificed their babies for rain and shit like that, okay? And you're trying to, like, make them out to be like these super happy primitive cultures. They died of infectious diseases before they could have ever died of heart disease anyway. And then Frank was, Vegan Gains told Frank that, and then Frank started like mumbling and going, tripping over his words again. It was really, really sad to watch. And Frank came out of the video creating like rebuttals saying Vegan Gains set me up to fail. Vegan Gains changed the topics on me, and he debated things I know nothing about. Vegan Gains never sent me the research on the topics we discussed. Like, that's your fault for not actually knowing what the fuck you're talking about. You were the one who brought up the health of primitive cultures in the first place, so it's not Vegan Gains' fault that you never researched it. So, I mean, it's a matter of evidence versus no evidence. Like, you never researched the health of primitive cultures. That's why you have no evidence that they are even healthy. But yet you make videos every single day about the benefits of eating raw meat. And, you know, you base this on, oh, it's natural. The human body needs fat soluble vitamins, blah, blah, blah. Well, the fact is, if you have digestive problems, eating a carnivore diet can definitely be a great alternative. But there are ways of slowly adapting your digestive system to plant foods over time, and you definitely can get vitamin A, vitamin E. Can't really get vitamin D from plants, but even from animal sources, it's really not that reliable. Everyone should take a vitamin D supplement, really. You know, Frank had no evidence that vegans were even deficient in these fat soluble vitamins, but yet he's always preaching about it. So, you know, even if vegans are deficient, which I've always kind of like touched on, and I warn vegans, you know, not to be fooled by their own dogma. The fact is, if you don't have evidence that to back up this whole deficiency thing, you really shouldn't be going around like preaching it like it's the gospel. You really sound like you know, a crazy religious preacher. I mean, that is dogma, okay? Really, really sad. And you guys, you know, I'm not vegan, but it's really sad that you guys call vegans religious when you guys are also religious. You know, that is dogma in a nutshell. So, just because there's no evidence for something, it could still be true, even if there's not enough evidence to prove it. But in this case, it is your responsibility to try to present some kind of logical basis and reasoning behind your belief, okay? So the burden of proof is your responsibility, especially when you can't present evidence. You've got to come up with some kind of logic. Why the fuck would somebody follow a diet based on primitive cultures that they know nothing about? You know, Frank said himself, like, you can't prove anything about these cultures and blah, blah, blah. Then why are you trying to say that they're healthy, and why are you telling people to eat like them? It's really, really sad. It's really crazy. So again, I'm not really saying like, oh, the carnivore diet is nonsense and anybody who preaches the carnivore diet is full of crap. I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not saying like, oh, everyone should go vegan. I'm not saying that Vegan Gains is like, you know, the smartest guy ever, and I'm not saying that he's right all the time. But here's what I am saying. Vegan Gains was very calm. He just asked questions and then stated facts the entire time. So people trying to say he's manipulative, people trying to say that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and this and that, you're all delusional, okay? In this debate, it was very, very clear that, you know, Vegan Gains didn't even have to try. And I'm really, really happy, by the way, that he's been more calm lately, because it's been giving me some information and helping me make better choices for myself, and helping me understand science a lot better. So anyway, leave your questions, comments down below. Let me know what you thought about this debate. Again, I recorded like a 50-minute long video about this the other night, but I accidentally like tripped on the cord, and so like it got all messed up. So let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you all next time. Subscribe.